Good
went
evening,
fine.
everyone. We are beyond thrilled to be here for the finale of the Constitution and U.S. Values series. Over the past few weeks, we've explored the Constitution and the events that helped shape its creation. Overall, it has been a valuable experience being able to learn about the foundations of this nation, and we hope that everyone will carry this knowledge forward into the future. We are grateful to have received this opportunity to meet and learn alongside everyone here. Now, without further ado, let's begin.
To change things up tonight, we thought we'd play a game of charades. So our student leaders here will perform actions that go along with 4 different amendments, and it's your job to guess which ones they are. Yeah, in front of the board.
Freedom of religion.
Yeah, which amendment?
Which amendment is that? Second or?
Go on, yeah, come on, you have to shout it,
First.
First. Okay. Yeah. I don't know if this is an expo board, so I'm not gonna write it down. But yeah, it was the First Amendment, guys. Okay, the next one.
If you go in order, we'll get. So, give it a go.
We're arresting them.
I know that, but what is?
Hold up.
I will do it.
Okay, in case you can't tell, this is a very charades-like, but yeah, we're arresting them.
Oh, we got that.
Freedom of speech.
Due process, 18.
I plead the.
Yeah, plead the fifth. Plead the fifth. I don't know. Yeah. Okay, this next one. I'm kind of just going along with this. Okay, so this next one, I think is kind of easy, but you just arrested them, and now I'm punching him. I'm punching him. This is his punishment. This is punishment. And they have a right to not get punished. But this is a certain kind of punishment.
Cruel and
Unusual punishment. And that is the 8th Amendment.
Okay. How are we gonna do this?
Oh, this next one's real easy. I just thought this would be fun.
Right to get angry.
Right to bear arms.
Bear.
Okay.
Thank you all for not only joining us tonight, but for being a part of this series over the past few weeks. This event would not have been possible without the support of Dr. Stafford, as well as Ms. Nadeau, Ms. Palmer, and the McIver's Grant Library. We hope you all enjoyed learning about our country's history and foundation, its progress since the earliest settlements, and the Constitution's role in shaping today's government.
Most importantly, we hope the knowledge you've gained will stay with you and inspire you to engage with these principles and carry them into the future. Have a wonderful evening, and let's continue to learn and celebrate the freedoms that make this nation strong. And now, it's our privilege to introduce our presenter for the evening, Dr. Matthew Stafford. Please join us in welcoming him.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it. I think whenever I walk near a speaker, it's going to do that. So I apologize in advance if I walk near the speaker and do that to your ears. I want to thank our sponsors again. I'm not doing this for money, but the money is going to give you food. So the bus stop has done a great job providing food for these 4 things, and I want to thank them for bringing outstanding food, and all the sponsors for supporting that. So appreciate that. That's what we're going to talk about tonight, a timeline of constitutional events leading to issues today. I'm going to enumerate the issues. I'm not going to take any stand on any of those issues because this is apolitical. You may have strong feelings about those issues. Where it affects me is I want to know how those issues are affected by or affect the Constitution. This is where we've been. Our submarine is down near the bottom now, as illuminating the evolving Constitution and issues today. And it's a deep discussion. It's about 250 years and 60 minutes. Woo! First off, I try to give you different lenses for thinking about things. I want to give you this lens. That's a digital clock or a digital watch. It tells you something. It tells you now. That's all it tells you. The time right now. If you look at that, you may get all the information you want, but you're going to have to calculate in your head how much time you have or how much time has been since. In other words, it says nothing about the past and nothing about the future. It just says now. Where if you have a historical view, this is how you see the world. The world is always a moment, but that moment's always shaped by the past, and it's always shaping the future. And I tell you that David McCullough, in the new book that just came out, and I'm a big David McCullough fan. When I was running university, I gave him an honorary degree just so I could spend the weekend with him. And I tell you, the whole time he had me laughing. He was a funny guy, and I'm so sorry we lost him. He's got a new book out. It's put together by his daughter. It's called History Matters. It was just published. I recommend it to you. But he gives this sample. And he says, you know, I'm a short-term pessimist, but I'm a long-term optimist. And I can tell you, if you have a sense of time like this, you can be a long-term optimist because you always remember the wonderful memories of the past and you always see the hopeful progress of the future. And I encourage you to think that way because we've done a lot of great things. You know, I used to talk to federal executives, and a lot of times federal executives were feeling pretty down. And I'd always tell them, you know, this is the nation that solved the problem of the Second World War so there wasn't immediately a third one. We fed the world in the Marshall Plan to make sure that wouldn't happen. We conquered diseases. We put a man on the moon. This nation can do anything. It just has to set its mind to it. And your federal government is why that happened. People came together to get something done that they couldn't do themselves in a very Plymouth-like way. So I encourage you to have this historical view. And with this historical view in mind, that's where we're going to go tonight. I'm going to run this whole thing through a constitutional timeline. I have a lot of pictures and a lot of things that I want to talk about on that slide. I can't do it all in 60 minutes, so some of these things are going to be very, very quick. We'll go like World War I, World War II, phew, it's gone. Nevertheless, there's some important things that happen in here. One of the important things that's happening here is what the young ladies talked about before we got started, and that's the Bill of Rights. And you'll recall that we had the ratification of the Constitution, and Madison said, Bill of Rights, you don't need no stinking Bill of Rights. You got the Constitution. All those rights and more are in this Constitution. And if you enumerate them, by gosh, people will think that's all the rights they have. But Jefferson and they would call themselves the Democratic Republicans, that was the name of the party, they were the Anti-Federalists, and they said, no, we need a Bill of Rights. You have to spell this out. And we're not going to ratify your Constitution until you give us a Bill of Rights. So we have a Bill of Rights. And I'll run through these fairly quickly. The First Amendment. There is a survey that's out, and I always have to look up for my numbers. There's 5 freedoms listed there. The young ladies hit a couple of them. Asked what specific rights are guaranteed in the First Amendment. 3/4 of respondents, 74%, could only name one. 39% of people got freedom of religion. 74% said the First Amendment, but only 20% could get 4 out of the 5. So my question to you, and I won't embarrass you out loud, can you name all 5? There they are. Freedom of speech, press, assemble, petition. And this is a way to remember them. RAPS. If anybody ever asks you, it's RAPS. And you can think about that, okay? Religion, assembly, petition, press, and speech. The Second Amendment. The Second Amendment didn't used to be controversial. For 218 years, this country had a common understanding of what the Second Amendment was. It didn't become controversial until just recently. But that's what it says, a well-regulated militia. The subject of the sentence is the right to keep and bear arms. The modifier, well-regulated militia, was understood by everyone coming up for 218 years to be part of that sentence. And then we had a decision where Justice Antonin Scalia came forth, and I'll hit that in my timeline later on, and said that basically everybody has a right to protect themselves with arms. And that changed the whole dynamic, and we started to change things. We had gun control. There was a gun control measure passed under FDR to eliminate gangster guns. I kid you not, in the 1930s. It went after submachine guns, sawed-off shotguns, and silencers. But everybody had understood, common understanding, that it was okay to regulate arms up until Scalia came in with his decision. He wrote the decision for it, and that launched this whole controversy, which I find rather fascinating. If you read Madison's original draft for this Second Amendment, the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed, a well-armed and well-regulated militia being the best security of a free country, even to stop the United States Army if it ever gets out of control. But no person religiously scrupulous of bearing arms shall be compelled to render military service in person, because the Quakers were not going to pick up arms and be part of your militia, and neither were some of the other religious groups. So there it's clear he's talking about the militia. Not so clear as it has been modified over the years. Now we tend to argue over what this right means and how expressive we can be with that art. Will it be resolved? Yeah, I think it will be resolved someday. Okay? I do not think you're going to uninvent the problem of guns in America, because there's now more guns than there are people in America. In fact, there's multiple times the number of guns in America. You're not going to go back, and no one's going to reclaim your property because the government doesn't have the power to reclaim property. So we're going to have to come to some sort of understanding. Will we? Yeah, we will. We are always moving towards understanding. And again, I'm hopeful. I always see the future. How about the Third Amendment? No soldier shall be quartered without the consent of the owner. Remember when the British quartered their troops? We didn't like that. So this was fresh on our memory when we were framers, and so we put that in there. The Fourth Amendment, the right of people to be secure in their persons against unreasonable search and seizure. And it applies for searches and seizures. The Fifth Amendment, and they acted out the Fifth Amendment for us. This is your rights that you have. Now, this wasn't a Miranda warning. The Miranda warning doesn't come until 1968. And if you're my age or just slightly younger, you know the Miranda warning because Jack Webb was running Dragnet, and he said, America needs to know about this right. So in every episode of Dragnet, you heard him or Bill read the Miranda warning, and that was so you would be educated on the Miranda warning. So again, if you are of an age, you remember those words coming out of Jack Webb's mouth. The Sixth Amendment. This tells you how you're going to have prosecutions. It's going to be speedy trial. It's going to be an impartial jury. It's going to happen in the state where the crime was committed. And the person has to be informed of the nature of the crime, because that wasn't happening. Remember when the British were running things, they actually made us go back over to Britain to be tried. That's not going to work. Suits of common law, where the value in controversy exceeds $20, you can get a jury trial. So on civil cases, if it exceeds $20, you can get a civil trial. Now, a lot of time has passed since this is written. Have we raised the amount from $20? No, it's still $20. You can inconvenience a jury of 12 people to come and listen to your complaint over a $21 grudge you have with Target. Isn't that neat? Excessive bail shall not be required, nor excessive fines imposed. Cruel and unusual punishment. 9. This is a fun one. The enumeration in the Constitution of certain rights shall not be construed to deny or disparage others. This is right out of Madison's mouth. You don't have to have it listed in a certain act or a certain constitutional amendment to have that right apply. And so when the kid's saying there, you're not allowed to be here, and he says, yes, I am, I'm exercising my 9th Amendment rights, he is, because it didn't say you couldn't be there. And so you can use the 9th Amendment for almost anything. It's called the Inkblot Amendment because people tend to read stuff into it, whether it's there or not. But I'm telling you, that's what Madison wanted. He wanted you to read your rights into it. And the 10th Amendment helps with that. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution nor prohibited by the states are reserved to the states respectively or to the people. If it doesn't say it's a power of the federal government, it's a power of the state government or a power of the people. Again, along Madison's lines. This is the heart of federalism. And federalism is a unique concept which basically says a sovereign government exists within a sovereign government. The states are sovereign, the country is sovereign. The only time that the country intercedes into that sovereignty is when it's specifically named in the Constitution. So states have power. And again, we're going to have a lot of battles about that over the course of our history. These are the zombie amendments, and I didn't know where to put this slide, so I put it here. The first one is Madison's First Amendment. When he originally wrote 20, 12 were approved through Congress, 10 were ratified. The first and second got lost in space. The second one eventually comes around. It's the 27th Amendment. We eventually passed that. The first one never came around. It's still out there. It was approved by Congress, but it's still waiting to be ratified. And it's the House Apportionment Amendment telling us how we're going to apportion our House of Representatives with the population that we had in 1789. I don't think it's coming back. The next one, 1810, Titles of Nobility Amendment, basically said you couldn't accept the title of nobility from a foreign government. I don't think anybody cares anymore. The Slavery Amendment would have kind of solved the slavery issue. However, we had a war to solve the slavery issue, so it kind of went away, but it's still out there. Child Labor Amendment in 1924 was going to fix that problem. It's been solved by law. Equal Rights Amendment in 1972 came near close to passing, and then people withdrew. In fact, Tennessee withdrew support for the ERA, and so it's still out there, could be resurrected and passed. And then the Voting Rights Amendment in 1978. Back to our timeline. So we have the Bill of Rights. I want to spend just a moment. You don't know this about me. I'm a military historian. You do know that. My focus is on World War I. One of the things that the military started doing in the 1990s, we had this big movement to inculcate Indian American history into U.S. history, because we found that a lot of the groups that were fighting guerrilla-style warfare were using Indian tactics, American Indian tactics. So that's the kind of Indians I'm talking about. So we got deep into Indian history. So I'm going to go deep into Indian history, and I'm going to talk just a bit about this battle that occurs, and that's the Battle of the Wabash. The Battle of the Wabash River, a battle of 1,000 slain, 4 November 1791. Native Americans led by 3 tribes there are holding off at Wabash, roughly where Fort Wayne, Indiana is now. We want to take that territory because they're attacking our settlers. The Northwest Territory is not opening up. So we send our friend Arthur St. Clair. Remember, his reputation is shattered when he gives up Ticonderoga. That's nothing compared to what's going to happen after this battle. He takes the Southern men to go up there and knock out the Indians. The Indians catch him unaware in the morning. Indians take about 70 casualties. We take about 700. About 700. It's the worst defeat of an American army by an indigenous force in American history. If you think, I thought that's General Custer. Custer lost 268. He lost 678. This is a big deal. Now, there's a new book out on this. It just came out a couple years ago. It's extraordinarily good. If you're not familiar with this, I was born in Indiana, so I was. But St. Clair's image is never going to improve from this. Washington's going to fire him from his job. Why is this important for the Constitution? Because this is the first time that Congress says we've got to investigate the executive. I can't believe the executive sent this guy up to do this. And so the first time that Congress comes in and pulls people up to testify is because of St. Clair's defeat at the Battle of the Wabash. Moving on. The Fugitive Slave Act in 1793. That is an act right here. That's an act basically to put some teeth into the Constitution. The Constitution basically says that you can't keep other people's property. This one's going to be a mechanism that's going to force runaway slaves to be returned. It's going to aggrieve people in the North, particularly the abolitionists, particularly the Quakers. Remember I told you last week that the slaves were running to Pennsylvania because they had no slavery laws in there, and they would actually help for that Underground Railroad to get you out. Seat of government moves around quite a bit at first. I told you about that horrible, horrible election of 1800. It's partly triggered by this 1798 Alien Sedition Act. You're going to find it hard to believe, but we had John Adams, who was president at the time. John Adams didn't like people making fun of him. He didn't like people calling him names. He didn't like to have the media write bad things about him. So he passed the Alien Sedition Act and made it illegal. And this did not go over well with a lot of Americans. One of the Americans it didn't go over well with was his vice president, Thomas Jefferson. Thomas Jefferson had a friend, and the friend had actually gotten sent to prison for this. So the friend comes to Jefferson and begs him for help. Jefferson's going to help him. He's going to run against John Adams in the next election, one of the ugliest elections in American history. I've told you the names that they called each other. Nevertheless, Jefferson's going to win that, and we're going to get rid of the Alien and Sedition Acts. But anytime you start to hear politicians complaining about what people are saying about them in the press, I urge you to go back and read the Alien Sedition Acts. Having people make fun of our elected officials is better than that. There's this moment that occurs, and it's over here, let's see, right there, in 1802, where this Baptist convention basically writes to Thomas Jefferson, and they say, hey, our Connecticut government, they're giving favors to people for religion. That should be our right. Religion's kind of a right, isn't it? I mean, they shouldn't be. And Jefferson writes back and says, basically, there's a wall that separates church and state. That's not his own. Roger Williams originally said that 100 years earlier, back when he was settling Rhode Island, but Jefferson liked the line, and he used it. That is so ingrained in the American populace that we think it's in the Constitution or we think it's in the Declaration. We think it's somewhere. No, it's in a private letter from Thomas Jefferson that he wrote to a church lady to reassure her that, yeah, they should probably respect your religion. What does the Constitution about it say? It just says that America will not have religious tests for offices and that it will never impose a religious set of principles upon its citizens. That is in question today. There's a lot of talk about bringing religion closer to the state. That line comes up a lot today. It's kind of nice to know where it came from, a private letter. The Louisiana Purchase. This is fun. In French, it's called the sale of Louisiana, which I get a big kick out of. What's interesting is that they don't really own the property like we own property today. When we own property today, we control it, we improve it. They owned New Orleans and they owned St. Louis, and the rest of it was just there. It was Indian territory waiting to be conquered, and basically you're selling the right to conquer. So they sell it, 530 million acres. They sell it at $8 a square mile, $18 a square mile, which is absolutely amazing. Now, what does Thomas Jefferson want out of this? What does he want? Does he want to expand across America? What Thomas Jefferson wants is a woolly mammoth. He has this thing about bringing a woolly mammoth back to the East Coast. I kid you not. And so he sends Lewis and Clark out there to find him a woolly mammoth. Do they find one? Nope, they find some great bones, though. That's from bones from Bone Lick, Kentucky. When you walk into Monticello, they're actually there, and you can see the mammoth bones, and he would show those things off. But poor Tom never got his woolly mammoth. I feel for him. He really was a fascinating guy, though. If you go to Tom's house, you're going to see all the inventions that he had created. He had this one thing where you'd write with one pen and it would write on another page at the same time, and so in a stereo way, so he'd have a copy of all of his letters. Thank God he did, because now we know what he wrote. The man was always thinking. I told you the first week that John F. Kennedy took a tour through the White House. He stopped at a table and he told his foreign visitors, around this table sat the greatest minds in American history. Thomas Jefferson took his lunches here alone. That's how smart the guy was. He also had an ego, though. When you would go to visit him in his later years, he would rush down to Hall in Monticello, and he would show you the original draft of the Declaration of Independence, not the one the committee messed up. Moving on, we have Marbury versus Madison. Again, I told you a week ago that this wasn't an original. The judicial review was not an original power of the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court stepped in and declared that. I could go through the whole story. Madison didn't deliver the appointments that were made by Adams. Marbury got upset because he wanted one of those appointments. He sued to get the appointment out of the Supreme Court's hand, and the Supreme Court just stepped in and said, wait, I can't do this. This is unconstitutional, and that stuck. No one said anything. They looked both sides to their left and right. Is anybody saying anything about judicial review? No one said anything. So they did it again in 1810 with Fletcher versus Peck, and that was it. Judicial review has stuck ever since. I find it interesting because what other implied powers exist in the Constitution that somebody's going to pull out someday? 12th Amendment passed. That's on presidential elections. Congress prohibits importing slaves. You'll remember in the Constitution it said you wouldn't ban importing slaves for so long. Well, now it's here. And did the South fight back against this? No, they did not. Why? Because they were growing their own harvest of the slaves internally. Having cheap imports undercut them. They didn't want cheap imports. They wanted to grow their own. Slavery almost went away. It came dog close to going away. Why didn't it go away? It was economically infeasible by the late 1700s for us to have slaves. It was just too expensive to clothe and feed those people. However, Eli Whitney invented the cotton gin. And a cotton gin is how they used to gin cotton, is you take the cotton with the fibers with the seeds in and you pull it between two rakes and you'd go back and forth against that until you eventually got all the seeds out. Well, Eli Whitney's machine operated roughly 50 times faster than a person with the two paddles. 50 times faster meant that one person could do the work of 50 people. All you had to do is give them more cotton. So they grew more and more and more cotton. As they grew cotton, it wore out the land. It took all the nutrients out of the land. They had to continue to push west. So we have created now, using economic history, an impetus for land expansion, which is eventually going to come into political conflict for control of the Americas. We have the War of 1812. The War of 1812 is interesting. It's interesting for a couple of reasons. One, we're back against Britain again. Another thing, we have just had that big war with the Wabash. All those Indian tribes are out there, and they were sided with the British, and now they're coming back, and we're very worried that the Indians are going to be a problem for us again. Nevertheless, we fight this war. It's not a long war, 1812 to 14. A couple of things that happen out at the burning of Washington, D.C. Dolly Madison manages to save the prints and the valuables. The Battle of Baltimore. The Battle of Baltimore is very famous because they come there and they bomb Fort McHenry during the night. And of course, Francis Scott Key watches this and he sticks his head over the side of the ship there the next day, and he writes his poem, and the poem is called The Defense of Fort McHenry. And he sets it to a tune called the Anacreontic Song. It's written by John Stafford Smith, and it's a British drinking song, and no one can sing it. But nevertheless, it becomes our national anthem. That's much later. And then we have the Battle of New Orleans, which is fought on January 8, 1815, between the British and the Americans. The Battle of the Climax was the Gulf campaign that was going across the South then. It took place 15 days after the Treaty of Ghent was signed, ending the war. Communications were poor at the time, so they didn't get word that the war was over. This is much like the Indians at the Wabash. Americans suffered 71 casualties. The British suffered 2,000, including the loss of the general and the assistant general in charge of the battle. It was a massive defeat on the part of the British, a humiliating defeat for the British, which is going to characterize British-American relations after this for some time to come. We have the states admitted. I always put the states admitted. Missouri is admitted. Missouri is a result of this Missouri Compromise, and the Missouri Compromise is a result of Henry Clay. And Henry Clay is a powerhouse. Him and two others, one being Daniel Webster, but there's this triumvirate of politicians at the time who are extremely powerful. Clay's a tariff man. Clay is also this great negotiator who's able to solve this. And the Missouri Compromise is no slaves in the North, no slaves in the South. We got a dividing line. Only exception is going to be Missouri. And of course, we're going to go to war with Missouri. Missouri is going to turn into a bloody mess, and it's going to lead as a preview into our Civil War. James Monroe takes place. Monroe is born when you're in Northern Virginia. Within 43 miles, you're walking past the homes of George and James Monroe. The idea that you'd have four geniuses like that who are going to shape this country so profoundly in such a small area is absolutely amazing. But nevertheless, Monroe comes out with the Monroe Doctrine, which is basically Europe, you keep your hands off of the Western Hemisphere. You're hearing talk about that now because we're seeing expansions from China particularly is very interested in setting up port bases in South America, which would give it more expansion and more control over the Pacific. So you're going to hear a lot more talk about James Monroe and the Monroe Doctrine. In 1820, Jefferson writes another letter, and I love Jefferson's letters because they've always got something. And here he admits, he says, about slavery, we have the wolf by the ears. We cannot hold it, but we certainly cannot let it go. At this point, he knows that slavery is such an issue that is tearing us apart, but we can't live without it. We have created an economy that's so based on this that we can't separate it. The economy would fail. And we don't know that, we know it's not right, but we know we can't let it go. He has friends who are at this time committing the manumission for their slaves or letting them go. He's going to hold on to his. Gibbons versus Ogden, interstate commerce. This is where we start to see the Supreme Court intervene to say that, hey, those congressional powers, those are the power to regulate Congress. That's really important. This is Robert Livingston and Robert Fulton. New York has given them permission to basically run any boat that's powered by steam or fire. They've got total control over it. And the other states say, wait a second, you know, we have to use those routes too. They appeal and basically say that New York can't do that because regulating interstate commerce is a congressional function. Brown versus Maryland, this is where we're going to use the National Supremacy Clause. You're going to see the first time the Supreme Court's going to step up and say, we're going to prohibit discriminatory taxation by the states. In 1829, we have Andrew Jackson. He becomes the president. There's a big party in the White House when Andrew Jackson's elected. They destroy the White House. It's kind of famous how much damage they did. He was a wild and crazy guy, and he's unique. Whenever a president misbehaves in some way, they always compare him to Andrew Jackson. But he's got some interesting ideas. One of his interesting ideas is that he's going to bring in his buddies to basically take the positions in the government. They're going to call it the spoils system in 1829. It's going to lead to problems later on, and I'll get to that. The nullification crisis, South Carolina doesn't want to pay a tariff. They say we don't have to pay a tariff. There's nothing you can do to make us. And the Supreme Court says, oh, yes, we can. And that ends the nullification crisis and talks about the supremacy. And the supremacy clause is going to be reinforced again and again. In 1836, Arkansas is admitted, 37, Michigan is admitted. You're going to see this balance between North and South states. Also in 1836, we have the Texas Revolution. Texas is a fascinating place. It's a good place to visit. I lived there, and I'll say it's a great place to visit. Nevertheless, I'll tell you that Texas exists because of the Comanche Indian. The Comanche Indian was a fierce fighter. He was covered in grease. He didn't smell good. The other Indians didn't want to be near him. He was rumored to be cannibalistic. They were extraordinary fighters. They raided the borders around them. The Spanish called the area where they lived in North Texas and southern Oklahoma Comancheria. To walk through Comancheria was death. And so the Mexicans decided, you know what we need? We need a buffer group. We're going to let whites come down from the east and they can settle in there and let the Comanche kill them. So we have Texas because the Mexicans didn't want to mess with the Comanches. So we can get there, and there's some great growing land. It doesn't look like it now, but pretty much from San Antonio east, that was superb growing land at this time period. And they're going to settle there. At this point, the Santa Anna Lopez, he wants to go up and say, we're going to take this territory back. They're going to fight the Texas Revolution. The big battle, of course, is going to be the Alamo, but San Jacinto is where it all lands in 4 minutes. The Mexican army is destroyed, and Santa Anna is captured. He signs an agreement. That agreement's going to cause problems for him later on. Charles River Bridge versus Warren River Bridge. This is innovation for the public good. Charles River had a contract to build a bridge and charge toll. The government then said, we're going to allow another bridge to be built. It'll eventually be toll-free. Charles said, you're going to put us out of business. So he sued, and the government basically said, I know what we promised you. However, for the public good, we're going to do what's best for the public good. And so you're going to see, and all the stuff about eminent domain is going to come on this and cite back to the Charles River. But it's talking about the superiority again of the federal government to do what it needs to do. Florida and Texas are admitted here. And then we have the Mexican-American War. The Mexican-American War is a defining moment in our history. It's called James K. Polk's War. He's James K. Polk's Little War, actually. He's a Tennessean. He's from here. He basically sends a troop back and forth to march against the Rio Grande. That's Mexican territory. They do this until somebody shoots at them, and then we've got our war. And we conquer. We conquer, and we march troops all the way down into Mexico City. It's a big deal. We take a lot of territory. We'd offered to buy that territory, and Santa Anna didn't want to tell us that territory, so we took it from them. There are statues around a hill in Mexico City of young teenagers who fought to defend themselves against the Americans. They were killed, but those statues stand there in a memorial to the fight they put up. My mom always said every war is still fought in the minds of those people who remember it with emotion. I can tell you that the Mexican-American War is still being fought by some people in Mexico who are still very angry about what happened. Nevertheless, there's an interesting conversation that starts in the newspapers of America about the Mexican-American War, and it goes like this. Is it America's destiny to be a good nation, a nation of laws and mutual respect, or is it our destiny to be a great nation like Rome and conquer? And America made a conscious decision at that time that our role was to be a good nation. And we kind of turned our back on James K. Polk's Little War. It was kind of a source of embarrassment for us. But I think that discussion's coming again in America. Is it our destiny to be a good nation or a great nation? 1848, gold is discovered in California. Now, the Texas Revolution ends there, 1830s, and they want to be a state. And they're still not a state until 1845. You can see, it took them 9 years to be a state. Okay? Gold's discovered in California in 48, and look at that. 2 years later, they're admitted. So if you got gold, you come in a lot quicker than if you don't. In 1852, Uncle Tom's Cabin is published. Harriet Beecher Stowe writes this little book, and the book sweeps America away. It rises sentiment. Last week, I showed you Blake's pictures, the illustrations of slavery that alienated Britons from the slave owners in Britain. Tom's Cabin did the same thing in America. It made people sick that people were treated this way. I can tell you it is worth your time to read it. It's worth your time because it's the moment when the woman is carrying her baby across the frozen Ohio River and Simon Legree is coming behind her. It's really an exciting book. But it's a very, very emotional book, and very much intentionally so. So you can see how people were motivated towards anger. And that's going to be another notch as we move towards the Civil War. Cooley versus the Board of Wardens talks about dual federalism. We established this idea that states have power, federal government has power, and we want to balance that between the two. The Gadsden Purchase, that little bit of yellow down there, we went back to Santa Ana Lopez and said, we'd like to buy your territory from you, this beautiful Gadsden area down in there where Tombstone is located. And Santa Ana, remembering what happened after the last time he refused, he sold it to us for a fairly good price. Minnesota, Oregon admitted, Kansas admitted. Kansas is going to be a problem with bloody Kansas. We have the Dred Scott decision in 1857. The Dred Scott decision, the Taney Supreme Court, Robert Taney is a slave owner. He's the Chief Justice, and he's going to decide. He's going to decide on the doctrine of originalism. Originalism is what did the framers intend? Well, the framers didn't talk about slaves. They didn't talk about African Americans. They didn't talk about these people. Hence, those people weren't part of the equation. So like Indians, they're not citizens. So he declared that Dred Scott didn't have standing because he wasn't a citizen. This outraged people in the North. How can you say that? He's a human being. So we have these things that are building. We have bloody Kansas. We have the Dred Scott decision. We have Uncle Tom's Cabin. We're getting more and more emotional. Eventually, it's going to break with the Civil War. And again, we're moving very fast through history. I liken it to taking a piece of cloth with a beautiful pattern into it. And the historian cuts, and they cut the pattern, and then they hold it up, and all you see is that they've got this little string of angels, and you can't tell what the pattern was anyway to begin with. And I'm kind of doing that, and so my apologies to you. We could spend an hour and a half on most of these topics and 6 hours on the Civil War. I told you about how West Virginia was admitted during this last week, when I told you that a bunch of people in West Virginia who are in an occupied area said we would like to be a separate state, and the Constitution says you can't pull parts of states out to make separate states, but because Virginia was at war with us, we kind of bent the rules and we had West Virginia created. Then we have the Emancipation Proclamation in 1863. Lincoln decides that he's going to emancipate the slaves in the occupied areas there. One of U.S. history's most famous executive orders, and it is an executive order. All slaves in rebellious Confederate states are henceforth shall be free. Of course, they're not going to really be free until we occupy those things and they can escape to our lines. They are going to escape to our lines in numbers. We're first going to use them for labor, and later on we're going to uniform them. And the South is absolutely outraged that we're giving weapons to African Americans. They fight well. I can tell you that one of the most prestigious groups that I've ever studied is the Harlem Hellfighters of World War I. Given a chance, Americans fight very well for their country, regardless of their background. One of the most decorated units of World War II is a Japanese-American unit. You know, I think that people have something to prove, and by God, they have proved it. This transforms the war, though. Britain is actually thinking of coming in on the side of the South. You know, they've got some connections to the South, and the South does two things to screw it up. One is they're holding on to slaves, and Britain is pretty much away from slaves. The other one, though, is called cotton diplomacy. In 1861, the South makes this decision. You know what? They're using our cotton to make their materials, and that's what makes Britain rich, is all their textile mills, so we'll withhold the cotton. So the cotton, the 1861 harvest, the bundles would just sit there on the wharfs, and they would dissolve in the rain. They were rotted. And what did the British do? They started getting their cotton from somewhere else. Where did they get it? Egypt. Egypt has a longer growing season, so the fibers are longer. So if you're sleeping on Egyptian cotton sheets, when you go home tonight, it's because of a really bad diplomatic decision made by the Confederacy, where they said, we're going to cut off our cotton. Thought you'd find that interesting. But one thing that happens and this is what to me probably the most exciting thing I'm going to talk about tonight, is Lincoln reinvents the Constitution during the war. He absolutely changes it. We do not live by the framers' Constitution, we live by Lincoln's Constitution. How we got there and what it says is fascinating. If you look at Lincoln's Constitution, it's the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment, and you say, well, is it written in a document? Well, yeah, those three things are written in a document, but it doesn't have a preamble. Yeah, it does. The preamble is the Gettysburg Address. 87 years ago, that's a score is 20, so 87 years ago, he's writing this in 1863, so Lincoln's not talking about the Constitution. He's not talking about the Articles of Confederation. He's talking about the Declaration of Independence. When we weren't a nation yet, we were just declaring we were a nation. He went there. He could have gone further, he could have gone less far, but he went there. Why? Lincoln loved what Jefferson had to say in the Declaration of Independence, but it wasn't part of the Constitution. The Constitution went a different direction. And Lincoln decided he was going to reach back over history, grab that declaration, and pull it forward. And that's exactly what he does. This continent, a new nation, conceived in liberty, dedicated the proposition that all men are created equal. He took it right out of Tom's lines. Now we're engaged in a great civil war, testing whether any nation so conceived, so dedicated, can long endure. We've met on a great battlefield. He's there. The smell of the dead horses is still in the air at Gettysburg. People are covering their nose here. They're dedicating the cemetery to the dead. Here is Lincoln. The guy before him spoke for an hour. He gives up. He gives his speech. It lasts just a couple of minutes. But in a larger sense, we cannot consecrate this hallowed ground. The brave men, living and dead, struggled here. They consecrated it. They consecrated it with their blood. The world will little note nor long remember, which Lincoln got that wrong, but it can never forget what they did for us, is for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us. What is that task, Abe? Please tell us. That from these honored dead we take increased devotion for that cause. What is the cause, Abe? For which they gave their lives, that we highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain. He's leading up. I mean, this is building like a drum roll to something really big. What is it? Oops, I went the wrong way. This nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom. That's what it was, a new birth of freedom. It was that Declaration of Independence. He reached back and he pulled it, and he pulled it forward. And that's what he wanted to tell us. The 13th Amendment abolishes slavery. It's a very simple amendment. It has been pulled up. It's referenced in Supreme Court decisions, mostly today with sex trafficking, but it's not as cited. The most cited portion of the Constitution today in court cases involving constitutional issues is the 14th Amendment. It is the cornerstone of Lincoln's Constitution. Arguably, it's the cornerstone of what you see in our Constitution today. You are still hearing this discussed and argued on an almost daily basis. It starts off with the Citizenship Clause. That's being debated today. It's got this superseded 3/5 compromise, change that. Now every person is counted equally. It disqualifies candidates who've engaged in insurrection. That has been challenged recently. Affirm public debt authorized by Congress, but we're not going to pay for freed slaves. Provides for congressional enforcement of these. And then we had the 15th Amendment, which establishes the right to vote for all people, not based on race. That's the new Constitution. That's what Lincoln gave to us. Lincoln's assassinated, of course, before he can carry out his view for how we should consider the Americas. He wanted to welcome back the South, and he wanted us to let bygones be bygones. That wasn't going to happen. His party, led by radical Republicans, wanted the South to be punished. His deputy, who is going to rise up, is Andrew Johnson. Andrew Johnson's from Tennessee. He ran with the Southerner to try to pull. Johnson wants to be more forgiving. These are people are his friends. Johnson's going to issue an extraordinary number of pardons, and he did not have an auto pen. So he's writing these things day and night to get these Confederates back into the Union. Then we have the 15th Amendment. There it's passed. The slaughterhouse cases. This basically talks about what states can control in terms of marketing. Colorado's admitted. The Battle of the Little Bighorn, there it is, 1876. I used to do lots of studies and speeches and tours of the Battle of Little Bighorn. There's a lot to study there. From a constitutional point of view, I can tell you this. Word reaches Washington, D.C., as we are about to establish and celebrate our centennial. We've got dignitaries from around the world who have come to Washington, D.C. to celebrate this big moment with us. We've got the hand of the Statue of Liberty on display. It's a party atmosphere, and suddenly this news comes that 268 men were slaughtered by this indigenous tribe out there on the other side of the country. It is a source of embarrassment. Sitting Bull said before the battle, "I think this will be the last battle." Sitting Bull was kind of right. It was the last battle. After that, the Americans were going to take no hostages. We send Sherman out there, and Sherman, if you've not read about Sherman, he's an interesting fellow. He was a cavalryman. So whenever Sherman would stand still, he'd always stand with his arms crossed and his legs out like this, because he'd ridden horses all his life. And Sherman went out there, and he was absolutely ruthless in the type of war he fought. Later on, he's going to be an observer, American observer of the Franco-Prussian War. The Germans look at him during one particular victory, and they ask Sherman, "How are we doing, sir?" And Sherman spits on the ground. He says, "There's too few villages burning." That's Sherman's solution to the Indian problem, and that's going to be how we're going to handle this problem from then on. 1877 is the corrupt bargain. It was named that much later, but basically you have the Electoral College is kind of being questioned. The House Republicans don't want to let this thing go through the Electoral College. They don't want, or the Democrats, pardon me, they don't want Rutherford B. Hayes to be elected. So this crooked deal is made. Evidence on the crooked deal is sketchy, but nevertheless, it's made it into the history books as the corrupt bargain. It basically says, if you give us Rutherford B. Hayes, we will pull back federal troops from the occupation of the South. This ends Reconstruction, it ends occupation, and we're going to see a basically return to pre-slavery conditions for African Americans living in the South under the Jim Crow laws, moving into a very, very dark time in our history. But nevertheless, that's it. Rutherford B. Hayes is going to eliminate all that, and we're going to go to that next period. Posse Comitatus Act, you're going to hear a lot about that as we start to see the deployment of troops in the streets of America. This basically limits what the federal government can do with those troops. It comes from an old act where basically you deputize people to be part of a posse, and it says basically you can't do that with military people because military people are not law enforcement people. Now there's an exception to that, and that's going to be in that Insurrection Act. Female lawyers argued their first case in front of the Supreme Court in 1879. That's kind of unexpected for people, but we're starting to see a move towards women's rights, and that's one of the earliest signs that it's coming. The Pendleton Act in 1883 is worth discussing because of all the stuff about federal employees right now. Charles Guiteau, there on the left, thinks that he wrote a speech, and his speech was actually read by James Garfield. And he comes to James Garfield's door and said, "You read my speech. I should get an appointment to an office under the spoils system. I would like to be Secretary of State." And Garfield gets a big guy to shove him away from the door. Guiteau comes back again, and they won't even let him in. So Guiteau goes to a train station and shoots Rutherford B. Hayes in the back. That's Rutherford. He's young, he's handsome, he's kind of a John F. Kennedy type. Very, very popular. When he died, it was a really big deal. Sadly, if you're into medicine, the reason he died is because of the way that they handled the wound. They went poking in with some dirty sticks and tried to pull it out, and ultimately, because of the way they tried to extract the bullet, is why Rutherford B. Hayes died. He died slowly and at a lot of pain. This is Guiteau pictured over here in the news media, and the people were very upset. They shot our president because of the spoils system. We've got to get rid of this. We've got to go to a meritocracy. And so they do. Pendleton Service Act of 1883, that's George Pendleton, and he basically says we're going to have merit-based federal systems. This is the federal system that we're operating on now. It is a merit-based system. You keep having people say it's not a merit-based system. Yeah, they got to take tests to get their job. They got to take tests to they got to prove themselves to get promoted. Yes, they can be fired. It was hard to fire them up until Jimmy Carter came and changed the rules and created OPM in 1978. But nevertheless, I have fired a civil servant. It's not easy. It's not fun. It's certainly not a pleasant experience. But you can do it. If they need to be fired, they can be fired. Returning to the timeline, we have the Oklahoma land run. This is former Indian territory. We decided we're going to go ahead and open up the land run, and we have thousands of people who line up there, and they're going to rush forward and take the take the land, first person to settle and mark the property gets it. What do we do for the Indians? We move them on. That's kind of, this was mostly Seneca Indians who were at the area that was taken there. Wyoming and Idaho are admitted. North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, all admitted. All the Northwest comes in at the same time. We're not fighting the Civil War anymore, so slavery's not holding us back, so we can do that. Now, we had the Gilded Age. The Gilded Age, 1870s through the 1890s, characterized by no income tax. We had tariffs. We had the poor distribution of wealth. It's called Gilded because Mark Twain named it that because it just looked really, really pretty, but if you scraped away the surface underneath, it was ugly and rotting and things were falling apart. Every time America swings to the right, America swings back to the left. It is as natural and as predictable as it can be. So we swung to the right under the Gilded Age. We're going to swing to the left, and the Progressive Age is going to be the 1890s through the 1920s, and it's going to come and it's going to hit us full bore. You're going to see a lot of really, really interesting things that are going to try to open up, make food safe, get rid of child labor, make more equality, everything that you would think of as a progressive agenda is going to come. Spanish-American War, 1898, the battleship Maine has exploded. That's the Maine mast sticking out of Havana Harbor. This is where we decide whether we're going to be a good nation or a great nation again. This time we decide great. We're going to take Guam, the Philippines, Cuba. It's going to be under a protectorate, and we're going to expand. So that's an interesting time for us. Nevertheless, that's going to lead to the American-Philippine War, so that when the Japanese eventually take the Philippines, we're going to find a lot of Philippines who are fighting against us because they still remember that war. It's a particularly ruthless war. Plessy versus Ferguson. Plessy versus Ferguson is the separate but equal doctrine. We basically said this person complains that they did not get off the white car and sit in the black car, and it went to the Supreme Court, and they said, well, hey, so long as the two cars are the same, it is not a problem, separate but equal. That's not going to hold forever, but that's what we decide then. The first Great Migration commences in 1910. We have roughly 6 million blacks who moved from the South to the North to get away from Jim Crow laws. There's all sorts of attempts to stop them. Some of the attempts are bad to keep those people there, but these are qualified, competent laborers, and they want to have a life just like other people have a life, so they come north. Clayton Antitrust Federal Trade Commission Act, we established a Federal Trade Commission. Teddy Roosevelt's a big hero of mine. I could spend all night on Teddy Roosevelt, but what I want to say here is two things. One, Teddy Roosevelt vastly expanded the national park system. If you go to, and I encourage you to go to Theodore Roosevelt National Park in North Dakota, it's absolutely gorgeous. When the sun sets and the hills light up, it's like nothing you've seen. You'll walk with buffalo. I chased a coyote for 3 miles on foot. It's a great place to visit. But he did a great deal to set aside areas that would be protected for nature for all time. Something else he did, which is in the news today, is he won a Nobel Peace Prize. He won a Nobel Peace Prize for setting the Russo-Japanese War. Has anyone else won a Nobel Peace Prize? Jimmy Carter did for his work after the presidency, for making the world a safer place and opening up diplomatic liaisons. Barack Obama for a similar thing, is basically making the world friendlier. Al Gore won one for his environmental issues after the fact, and Woodrow Wilson won one for starting the League of Nations. So when you hear about presidents and Nobel Prizes, I'm telling you, there is a history of Nobel Prizes, and not all of them were big things like the League of Nations and solving the Russo-Japanese War. Some of them were just for the spirit. So could it happen? Yeah, it could happen. We don't control that, obviously. New Mexico and Arizona admitted a National Defense Act 1916. We're starting to move towards this idea of having a defense, and it's not going to be formalized until 1947 when we actually create the Department of Defense, but you can see that we're moving in a decided direction. 1913, 16th Amendment, we passed income tax. With income tax coming up, tariffs are starting to go down. We're starting to tax people directly. 17th Amendment, direct election of senators. Remember, we used to elect the House members elect the senators, now it's direct election. Two things are becoming more and more apparent about how this constitutional journey is going. One is the expansion of individual rights, and the second one is this idea of direct representation. Those are the two things, and we expand it again and again. 1920, we do something that's really, really interesting. We decide that we don't want to drink anymore. There's a wonderful, wonderful history behind that. Carrie Nation goes, and with her hatchet, she bangs up bottles of beer and booze and barrels of beer, and it's a really interesting thing. She says that it's destroying families, and there's a lot of press about this destruction of families. These poor people whose husband is drinking, and they're not supplying that. 1920, 19th Amendment extends to suffrage again. We're always expanding. We're always being more inclusive. We're always giving more rights. I passed through World War I with hardly a mention. I am a World War I historian. I will cry over this tonight. The Roaring Twenties, my grandmother was a flapper, and so I got to hear firsthand about the Roaring Twenties. She was really something, I have to tell you. She could outswear any sailor that I ever met. Yeah. In 1925, we start to see something that's really interesting, and it's the Supreme Court is going to start to force states to comply with the rights that you're granted within the Bill of Rights and the Constitution itself. At first, it was, these are only federal rights that are protected. This is the start of a trend, and you're going to see this in multiple Supreme Court decisions. I won't go there, but there's a lot of them. In 1926, Myers versus the United States, this is on removing cabinet members. The reason that Andrew Johnson was impeached is because he fired Stanton, the Secretary of War. And the Republicans said, hey, the Senate confirmed him, and now you're getting rid of him. They'd passed a law saying you have to go back to the Senate to get approval for that. Supreme Court said, no, you don't. And so it was gone. This is where they basically said, no, you don't. This is it. If you hire him, you fire him. Implicit in the hiring instructions of the Constitution is the right to fire. I showed this picture of lynching August 7th, 1930, not because it's particularly graphic or anything. That's where I was born, Marion, Indiana. They did a special on my hometown called City of Shame. It'd take me 15 minutes to tell you the story. It's extraordinarily moving. Nevertheless, 3 men were accused of assault. 2 were drug out and they were hanged by their neck until they were dead. It's a source of embarrassment. Marion was blighted by that. The cities around it rose to prominence. It did not, and it's largely argued because of this. But it's an entrance into lynching. Extrajudicial killing by a group. Lynching was quite common. We have documented evidence that 4,467 individuals were lynched across the country. I won't go into great detail. There was a lynching in downtown Dyersburg in 1917. There were lynchings all across this country. It is not just a southern thing. That's why I show you Marion, Indiana. Marion, Indiana in the 1920s is the KKK capital of North America. So this is a real problem. 73% of post-Civil War in the South have lynchings. It peaks in this time period. It's not banned officially in law until 2022 with the Emmett Till Anti-Lynching Act. But the Equal Justice Initiative in Montgomery, Alabama in 2017 starts to do studies of this. They've got a memorial in Montgomery. It is extraordinarily moving to see that memorial. If you're down in Montgomery, I urge you to see it. The idea that we can treat our fellow man in awful ways, I'm always surprised by that. Nevertheless, this is something that we've gotten control of over the years. We've done better and better with this. And that anti-lynching law has actually helped. 28th Amendment, the lame duck. This basically has the president take office a little earlier, that has the Congress take office a little earlier so that they don't have the long lame duck period. 1930 to 36, we have the Dust Bowl. The Dust Bowl is an economic hardship. It's been coming in the Great Depression. Ken Burns did a great special on the Dust Bowl, a great movie. I urge you to watch that. Roosevelt takes charge after Hoover's administration has failed to solve these problems, and Roosevelt begins his New Deal administration. He's being stopped, though. His Supreme Court is stopping him. And Roosevelt says, if you keep going against justice, I'll have 12, I'll have 15, I'll have 18, I'll have 21 until I get the rulings I want. It works. They back down. Some of the guys who are against him retire. All that's happening in that Great Depression time period. You heard that again over the previous administration. They too talked about packing the court. Will it happen? I don't know. I don't know. We haven't ruled it out, though, because we don't have a constitutional amendment that says the court size. National Firearms Act, that's when we ban gangster guns. First time we start to do that. The Wagner Act, collective bargaining. We give people permission to actually negotiate, and we're still coming out of that very progressive era here, so we're giving labor a chance to get representation. Social Security Act, it was never meant to live on. It was going to be a supplemental income for old people like me so we could live with our kids and help out with our kids' income. It has turned into some people are living just on Social Security, and I don't see how they do it, but it's hard. Second Great Migration starts to come in. Same thing as last time. That's Billie Holiday's song, Strange Fruit. The strange fruit she's talking about is young men hanging from trees. That's 1937. If you want to be gobsmacked by somebody who's singing about lynching and doing it in a way that'll bring tears to your eyes, I encourage you to listen to Billie Holiday's Strange Fruit. National Labor Relations Board, Jones Laughlin Steel Corporation, Federal Regulation of Labor. We have the right to regulate labor just like we have the right to regulate commerce. Now we're talking about World War II and right out of World War II. 1947, Harry Truman, one of my favorites, and David McCullough wrote a book about Harry Truman. It's 1,000 pages long, but it's worth your time. It's very good. Nevertheless, he says a lot of good stuff. He swears a lot. I'm not going to quote him. I will say this, though. In 1947 to 1949, he complained about his do-nothing Congress. His do-nothing Congress. What did his do-nothing Congress actually do? I want to read you some of the stuff that his do-nothing Congress did. The Taft-Hartley Act, the National Security Act of 1947, creating the United States Air Force and Department of Defense, and formalizing the advisory capacity of the Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff for the Commander-in-Chief. U.S. Information and Educational Exchange Act, the Foreign Assistance Act, which you'll recognize as the Marshall Plan, the Greek-Turkish Assistance Act, which is the Southern Mediterranean Marshall Plan, the Civil Air Patrol was created, and the Federal Water Pollution Act, the first water pollution act that was passed by government. That was his do-nothing Congress. They passed, in that time, 906 public bills. Our current Congress, the 119th since January of 2025, has passed 31 laws. Of those, they had the Lake and Riley Act. They had the Full Year Continuing Appropriations and Other Extensions Act, where they got to do another one of those. They had the Take It Down Act, combating the non-consensual online distribution of intimate image, and one big, beautiful bill. So if you get away from renaming post office and stuff like that, they're down to 5 laws. I urge you, I am not saying anything bad about your current representatives or your current Congress, but get involved. Vote for people who do stuff, okay? You want them to do stuff and help them know what to do. Right often, they want to hear from you, and they'll pretend they don't. 25th Amendment, that's the order of secession, is also that directive that says that if the president's incompetent, the cabinet get together and push him out. This is the do-nothing Congress over time to give you kind of an idea of how it moved over time. You can see that sometimes we have a Congress that is extraordinarily busy in passing laws. Sometimes, and the ones that are bipartisan are the light blue. We used to do a lot of bipartisan things, because we used to have this idea that when you went to Congress, you're working for the country, not just your constituency, and certainly not just for your party. So we got to get back to that. I'm not a party person. Madison warned us, don't go with factions. Factions will tear you apart. Boy, was he right. We have the Youngstown sheet and steel tube, limits presidential power. Harry Truman says if you shut down, if you strike during the war, I won't have munitions to fight the Korean War. He takes over the steel industry, and the Supreme Court says, oh no, you don't. And they made him give it back. Elvis Presley, that's all right. I mentioned that because we are so near Memphis. Brown versus the Board of Education is going to overturn Plessy versus Ferguson. Separate but equal is in itself unequal. Anytime you exhibit prejudice to someone and discriminate against them, even if it's the same, it's detrimental. The discrimination itself is wrong. It's argued by Thurgood Marshall. He's the lawyer in the center. He's going to go on to serve in the Supreme Court. 1955, a young man named Emmett Till whistles at a white woman in Money, Mississippi. That night, some white men come, knock on his door, take him out, and they kill him rather brutally. I won't go into details. They find his body on the banks of a river, tied to a wagon wheel, and one eye is out, and there's a lot wrong with the body. The mother takes the body back to Chicago and insists that the body be displayed without a closed casket. People line up around the street, and they come to see Emmett Till's body. Pictures of Emmett Till's body are in Jet magazine. They're online if you want to see them. They are not for the squeamish. And it motivates people around the country to do something. We've got to do something. One of the people who's motivated is Rosa Parks, who says, I'm not going to take this anymore. And she doesn't. She refuses to give up her seat. That starts the Montgomery bus boycott. That's going to start the civil rights movement. So if you're looking for, in war theory, we always talk about proximate and underlying causes. A stick of dynamite, the explosive, the gunpowder packed in the paper is the underlying cause. The match going to the fuse, that's the proximate cause. That's going to burn down and cause the underlying cause to explode. If you're looking for the proximate cause of the civil rights movement, it's a little boy named Emmett Till. John F. Kennedy, Malcolm X, Martin Luther King, and Robert Kennedy are all assassinated within 5 years. Political violence. Have we had political violence before? Yeah. We've had political violence like no one's business. We run about 4,000 explosions across the country between 1969 and 1972. There's a point of 18-month period where we have 5 explosions occurring because of political groups a day within an 18-month period. Why didn't we talk about it then? Well, it didn't get the news. Not everything made the news, and we didn't talk about it on social media. But we've gone through this before. There was a backlash to it. We solved the problem. We're going to solve the problem again. Beatles, I want to hold your hand. 23 Amendment, the D.C. gets to vote. They get to vote for president. They're going to get 2 electoral college votes. 24th Amendment, poll taxes are banned forever. I talked about the civil rights movement. Libel suits bought by the feds. New York Times, this is basically saying if you libel a public official, that you have to prove that you had bad intent. They can't just sue you for writing something bad about them. You have to prove that you had bad intent. It's almost impossible to prove what people's intent was. Griswold versus Connecticut. This is the right to privacy, taken right out of the 14th Amendment. They're going to say that now you have a right to privacy. It's eventually going to go to that decision on abortion. I'll get to that in a second. Miranda, 1966. It comes out, and then Jack Webb says, we need to put it into Dragnet, and that's why you know it. Anti-war protests, 1960s through the early 1970s. The anti-war protests are basically stopping the Vietnam War stops. Voting Rights Act, 1965, Lyndon Baines Johnson, a Southern white governor, signs into law an act to make sure that we have fairness for it. I'm always shocked by that. When people start to point at the South and say bad things, I say, Lyndon Baines Johnson signed the Civil Rights Act. And it was George Bush the Jr., who sent the AIDS relief to Africa when whole towns were being killed by HIV. It is not where you live. It is not a product of what state you're from. It's a product of how you believe in your heart. And those 2 men believed in their heart in what Jefferson had written and what Lincoln expressed in his Constitution, that all people are created equal. And I'm very proud of the fact that they did. We have the 26th Amendment, extends suffrage by age. Now 18-year-olds can vote. Why? Because the constitutional journey has always expanded participation and always expanded personal rights. Roe v. Wade, abortion. Okay, is it a right? According to Ruth Bader Ginsburg, they decided wrong. She said, it's not about privacy. This isn't about the relationship between a woman and her doctor, which is what they cited in the case. This is about the woman herself having some sort of command over her own body. So she said, this is going to get overturned, and she's right. Congressional Budget and Impoundment Act comes in. This is going to be a problem for us, and we're talking about impounding money right now when presidents pull back money and call back money that's been spent. Nixon comes out with executive privilege in 1974. I can talk to my people and it's not going to make it to the court. Oh, no, you're not. We're going to actually have the tapes to record, except where the secretary erased those few minutes. Civil Service Reform Act 1978, Jimmy Carter goes down in history. Again, we have the polls of historians. He's always near the bottom, poor guy. What a man of character. What an incredible man of character. One of the things he did, created OPM, did civil service reform, got rid of the super grades, and made a more stable civil service system. The war on drugs starts in the 1980s, and how did that work out for us? Yeah. Whenever you go to war with the symptoms and you're fighting the proximate cause, the fuse, and not the underlying cause, the explosive, you're not going to win war. You always have to look at the underlying causes. And they didn't do that. They just arrested people who had to match in their hand. And there was so much money, somebody else is going to light a match. FCC's Fairness Doctrine comes in 1987. It basically says that it had already come in, I forgot to talk about it, but this is where it's repealed. Under the Reagan era, they said that the Fairness Doctrine that came in that said you had to express both sides on top of on your newscast, you don't have to do that anymore. You can express just one side, and we start to become more polarized. If you're old enough to remember 60 Minutes, they used to have something called point, counterpoint, and they would sit on each side of the table, and one person would give the left view, and one person give the right view. And it was a lot of fun. We don't do that much anymore, but nevertheless, this is where it started to erode, and we're going to start to see segregated by beliefs. 27th Amendment, that's Madison's bill that he had. It was a zombie amendment for all those years. They finally passed it, and this says Congress can't vote themselves a raise and take the raise in the same term. Planned Parenthood versus Casey basically reestablishes the right to abortion. That's going to go away. We have the terrorist attacks, and we're going to start to get very, very nervous and very, very scared. Defense of Marriage Act, marriages between a man and woman under Bill Clinton. That's going to get repealed fairly quickly. Bush v. Gore. Why is that interesting? It goes to the House of Representatives to be settled, and finally the Supreme Court sinks in and says, no, we're not doing this anymore. No more counts. Stops it all. It's a conservative court. It's leaning towards the Republican side, and Gore says, that's okay. I don't want to tear my country apart. I accept the results of the election. So I think that's interesting. Help America Vote Act. This is for people who have conditions, who might be difficult for them to vote. It's going to establish how you're going to do it in very general terms, but the states still have control over doing it. Citizens United is going to change everything for politics. It's going to open the floodgates of money. And money's going to flood in, and it's going to be uncontrolled. And so now we have people rushing. What's the problem with that? Well, one, you don't know where the money comes from a lot of times. Two, the money is more available on the extremes. Most Americans are moderates, somewhere in the middle. But if you go to the extremes, that's where the money is, and that's where they go. So I think we'll see that change. Again, I always have hope for our future. Barack Obama passes Obamacare. I used to not call it Obamacare, but he said he didn't care if you called it Obamacare, so I called it Obamacare. This is a move toward expanded rights and privileges for every American. They're moving towards the idea that health care is a right. That's in the news again. We're fighting on that one again. Aurora, Colorado. We're starting to see this political violence. I'll start with the January 8th. This is Gabby Gifford who's shot. This is social media, pardon me. I want to move to Gabby Gifford because I'm running out of time. Political violence in our time. If I start with 2011 and start to move, you can start to see it's both sides. It's Republicans and Democrats, right and left-leaning people who are assassinated. They're not assassinated by the other side. The right's not shooting the left's not shooting right. Nutty people, usually young, disenfranchised young men, are shooting. And why are they? Well, there's a lot of underlying causes on that. One of them is social media. I blitzed through the social media thing because I'm running long, but they're too isolated. We're suffering from a national disease of loneliness and disconnectedness. The fact that you're here tonight is a sign that you're reaching out beyond the loneliness and the isolation. And I encourage you to reach out to your neighbors, your friends, but particularly to young men in your lives to know that they are loved, that they're respected, and that you can guide them to something better than sitting on a hillside shooting at people. A lot more political violence ends with the conservative activist Charlie Kirk. This has created a lot of emotion in America. That emotion, I'm going to say, is largely misdirected. It's directed towards anger. We've got to get to the action being directed at taking out the underlying causes, getting rid of the dynamite itself, not the proximate causes, the person with the gun. School shootings in America. We've had 463 school shootings since Columbine that have killed 300 plus people. This is another thing we're not solving. Okay? Whether you think it's guns or not, immaterial. What it is, we have to look at all the underlying causes. What's in that packet of dynamite? Who are these disenfranchised people and why they feel that killing people is the solution, and what are we doing about that? Shelby County versus Holder, Birmingham, Alabama, they go into there and they say, hey, look, you know, your Voting Rights Act made us, said that we were discriminatory, and so now we have to get permission from the federal government every time we make a change. The Supreme Court said, you don't have to do that anymore. You're not discriminatory anymore. Marijuana starts to be legal. I said this a long time ago when it first started. Once it's legal in one place, it's going to be legal everywhere because the Constitution is written that way, that you have to respect. If I'm married in one state, I'm married in all states. If I get a driver's license in one state, I got it in all states. So you're going to see this expand, whether you like it or not. I think it's coming. United States, Windsor, same-sex marriage is approved for the first time. We've got BAMN, voters decide, I have to move away from the microphone, that they're not going to use a race and ethnicity in administration of their degrees anymore. That basically Michigan can throw out the idea that you have to have race-based fairness. These young black men are killed. That's going to create a group called Black Lives Matter. It's actually created in 2015. You probably don't hear about it until after Rodney King, his name is George Floyd. Thank you. George Floyd is killed in 2020, but it exists. And it exists to try to make people aware that people are dying at the hands of police officers and others at a large rate. They're saying we should shoot whites? No, they're saying we should stop shooting anyone. And they're going to march, and they're going to march in the streets. Those marches are going to start off peaceful. They're going to stop being peaceful. They're going to move towards a more violent expression. But as people who've been putting up with this for a long time, we could go back to lynchings. Again, we have got to deal with underlying causes. ISIS, global war on terror. We'll talk about it another time. We're talking about war. This has all happened within the last 3 years. All of these orders you can see. Overturned Roe v. Wade, said it was decided wrong. It's going back to the states. It's not a constitutionally guaranteed right. Those rights that are not part of the federal government belong to the states. That's what the 10th Amendment says. Do I think they decided it wrong? No, I don't think they decided it wrong. They followed the Constitution fairly close. How do I feel about abortion? I think that it'll eventually be approved because we are always expanding individual rights. We always move towards Jamestown and away from Plymouth. So I think it's coming. West Virginia versus EPA eliminated clean air restrictions on coal-fired power plants. Students for fair admissions. Race cannot be considered for admission to Harvard. We're getting rid of the standards that we used to have for the making up for the past practices. New York Rifle Association overturned the rule requiring a need to carry. You used to have to express why you want to carry. Now you just have a right to carry, and that's from Scalia. Garland versus Cargo allows bump stocks. That was a Trump executive order that said you couldn't have bump stocks, and they repealed that. 2024 Ramini gun ban for those on restraining orders. They hold that one up. You still can't have a gun if you're on a restraining order, which I thought was a good decision. So it's not that they're throwing out all gun rules. So if you're pro-gun control, I think that the Supreme Court is trying to use a judicious nature in making their decisions. Trump versus the U.S., it defines presidential immunity. Was I shocked by the decision? No. If you look at the court cases of the past, it's very much in keeping with the court cases in past. The expression of it was pretty shocking that it had to be expressed, but we've kind of always understood that if the president did something in office that we didn't like, that was going to be protected because he's the president, and if we didn't like it, that we have an impeachment process that takes care of it, and that's basically what they said. Loper Enterprises, U.S. versus Cometti, ban on medical support for transitions. That was right out of the Tennessee playbook here. And it basically said that we don't have to support this transition to transgender people at a young age, wait till an older age. Parental opt-out rights for LGBT curriculum. And then we have the Charlie Kirk attack, so we brought it up to current. There are many issues on this graph today. I'm going to say some of these are norms. We're seeing the violation of norms. I'm going to tell you, norms are just norms. They're just the way we've always done things. We always kept our fork on the left and our spoon on the right. Somebody wants to put the spoon on the left, there's nothing you can do about it. Norms are going to be shattered. Yeah. Some of these are legal. The defiance of a legal thing. For instance, the Department of War. The Department of Defense was established by the National Security Act of 1947. You can't just call it the Department of War without going back and changing the law. Will Congress change the law? Yeah, probably. But let's do it right, you know? So we have the legal thing. Some of this is constitutional, though. And some of those, like birthright citizenship. You can't pass an executive order saying we're not going to recognize birthright citizenship because the 14th Amendment says all, every. And because it says that, we have to go back and do it right. And the Supreme Court's going to decide on that. So they've decided to hear this. Do not get upset about these things. Do not lose your temper over these things. America is moving. We are improving. We are perfecting. In order to create a more perfect union, we're moving to more perfect. Are we always going to get it right? Nope, we're going to stumble. My God, have we stumbled in the past. But look how far we've come. Be on that clock looking forward and saying, where are we got to go? The minor setback and the stumble of today, that doesn't mean you're going to be flat on your face for the rest of time. So what can we do? Stay aware. That doesn't mean staying aware by tuning into one channel. If you're onto one news channel and that's your source of news, you're not staying aware, okay? You're seeing one side of the puzzle, okay? These events are like cubes, okay? They've got at least 6 sides. Rotate, try to get to another side, see another side, talk to people who see differently than you, and think about maybe you're wrong. You know, if I held on to all the beliefs I held on when I was a kid, I'd stand up here and you'd know I was an idiot. Stay connected. Civil dialogue. Talk to friends, talk to others, talk to people who feel differently than you do. Do not let your Thanksgiving dinner be ruined by political talk. Okay? Talk about something else if you have to. But when you can have a civil conversation with those people, have a civil conversation with them. They may see something different. They may inspire you to do something. And stay involved. Take action. Write early, write often. Talk to your elected officials. My father had a saying, them that's in, them that's in, out, them that's out, in. He never voted for an incumbent. I used to think that was a really stupid policy. I've gotten older, I have the same policy now. Yeah. And read and heed the Constitution. People ask me, well, how do you vote? I vote on the 3 C's. Constitution, character, And because I'm a conservative, I vote on conservative fiscal values, not conservative social values. I vote on conservative fiscal values. I'm worried about my country's indebtedness. I think we need to get out of debt. So those are the things I vote on. If somebody doesn't hold the Constitution, I won't vote for them. If they have no character, then I won't vote for them, because if they take the oath to the Constitution, they won't keep it. So Constitution and character are the big two. If you want to know more about the Constitution, there is this wonderful group that puts this thing out, and it's the People's President. I'll find the name of the company. But these posters would be great in a classroom. They'd be great if you're trying to, it's from Periodic Presidents. And it's got the Constitution and all the amendments in it. And there's the amendments, the periodic table of amendments. And I love it. It's got the various influences that go through on these. And it's just a great visual aid. If you want to know more, read the Constitution. Please read the Constitution, preferably out loud to someone you love. Congress has a website, and if that's the website, constitution.congress.com, and it is an annotated Constitution with essays about every word in the Constitution. It will take you a month to read all the way through it. But if there's anything in the Constitution you don't understand, it's there. And I have to tell you, I've read it, and it is not biased. It is not biased at all. You'll see both sides, and they do a great job. Debate on the Constitution by the Library of America, and now I'm going to walk over here. 2-volume set's got all the Federalist Papers, but all the debates. So you get the Federalist and you get the Anti-Federalist, the whole argument. 2 volumes. You buy it from the Library of America. It's fairly cheap, under $20 for both volumes. You can get them used. Any book by Akil Amir. Doesn't sound like a good American name. The guy's brilliant. I've gone and heard him speak at the Constitutional Session on September 17th, Constitutional Plaza in Washington, D.C. It's magic to listen to him talk. All of these books are great. If you're interested in what I talked about, Lincoln's Constitution, Our Secret Constitution, that book is great. Lincoln and the Constitution by Dirk, also great. Good 1-volume histories of America, just to stay in touch. I bought several. If you want a tear in your eye and want to feel great about being an American, I urge America's The Last Best Hope by William Bennett. This just came out last week, Jill Lepore's book on the Constitution, We the People. I haven't read it yet, but I'm sure if it's as good as her book on American history, it'll be worth reading. I'll leave these up for you to look at. I have not read this book. This is the Supreme Court of the United States, all of the decisions. You just look them up when you want to know about one of them. Yeah. Yeah. So these are the other books there. Paul Meyer's ratification is great for that time period. Evolving Constitution Issue Days, that's what I talked about. I'm going to thank you for coming. I want to thank you for your concern. I want to thank you for being concerned about this country and making a difference in this country. Anytime you want to talk about this, I am free to fringe. So thank you for your time. I'm going to turn it back over to Mary, and I'm going to stick around in case you have any questions. Thank you.
Can we do this every Thursday night? Dr. Stafford, Matthew, you studied and shared the history. We've seen more than just information. We've seen and heard about action. The way knowledge inspires conversation, reflection, and change. And this series has been a bridge to see you with your years of experience and knowledge alongside new students to life like Mickey, Lily, and Myron. That combination has made these weeks something truly special. For tonight, Lily and Mickey decided to take the lead in shaping their own words and in deciding how they wanted to engage with you. They wanted to change things, and they did. That's their hope, to learn intelligently about our country's birth and past, and to carry that learning forward with action. And they do this with Dr. Stafford's help, with their teachers, with the library staff, and with their community, you. It is also very necessary tonight to give a very special and warm thank you to our own Marsh Nadeau. Several months ago, Marsh connected curiosity with knowledge and then turned that into action. And we are so grateful that you did that, Marsh. Thank you. And now I'm going to turn it over to our student leaders for the official close of our evening and this entire series.
Thank you again, Dr. Stafford. Before we wrap up, we want to remind you that Dr. Stafford will be sticking around. The coffee is still hot. Please feel free to stay, grab a cup, and let him know how much you've appreciated his time with us. We'd also like to take a moment to recognize our community partners who helped make this series possible. As we read your names aloud, please stand and we'll hold your applause until we've read the full list.
For starters, we have the Dyer County Historical Society, Raising Kellen, Bus Stop Dyersburg, Dyer County High School, Dyersburg State Community College, Sons of the American Revolution Corner Chapter, National Society Daughters of the American Revolution, the 2024 and 2025 chapter, Maple Ridge Assisted Living, the Discovery Park of America, McIver's Grant Public Library, and the Sonic here in Dyersburg. Now let's thank them all together with our applause.
On behalf of McIver's Grant Public Library, our community partners, and the student leadership team, thank you for joining us for the fourth and final night of our series, U.S. Values and the Constitution, taught by Dr. Matthew Stafford. I'm Mickey Thatch, and this is Lily Davis. We've truly enjoyed being a part of it, and we hope you have too. Thank you and good night.